Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Peace Islands New York event today. Thank you for joining us. If you're a first time here, or even if you're a regular, kindly hit the thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. We have very special guests today. And I might add that we hosted Craig last year, and his video from last year is one of our most popular programs on our YouTube channel. So the link to that, as well as the book that we're talking about today, is in the description to this video. Again, you can follow that up in your good time. Now we're looking at people of the book, and again, the link to that is in the description. Just a quick intro to Craig. Craig is a lecturer in sociology at Rice University and a global speaker who has contributed to the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, the BBC Foreign Policy, as well as numerous other publications. He's an American Catholic of Irish and Italian descent. He has written numerous books and articles on Christian-Muslim relations, which is his area of expertise. Welcome, Craig. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Please, the floor is yours. I might remind everyone, you will see to the right of your screen on the YouTube channel there, the chat screen. So please start asking your questions. We will have an opportunity in about 35-40 minutes to take your questions and present them to Dr. Considine. Thank you, Craig. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emre. And of course, thank you to Peace Islands in New York for hosting this event. And of course, to all of you joining us live here on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you might be. It's a pleasure to be with you. I hope you're well. I hope you're doing as good as you can be doing in light of the various circumstances that we're all dealing with, not only in the United States, but around the world. Thankfully, I have optimistic vibes today because this book, People of the Book, Prophet Muhammad's Encounters with Christians, which was published last year, 2021, towards the end of it, published by Hearst. This book is really a celebration, not only of Prophet Muhammad's vision for the Ummah, which I refer to in the book as a Muslim nation, but I'm going to unpack that in a little bit. But it's also a celebration of our shared Abrahamic tradition. So the book is very much, in essence and in spirit, rooted in bridge building. It's rooted in the possibilities that can exist amongst people who actually are of different faiths, but actually come together in search of a better world, in search of a better vision. So that's really the core of what this book is. Now, I want to actually start many generations before Prophet Muhammad came onto this earth. He was born in 570, but I actually want to start in the year 0 with Jesus. You have to understand the trajectory of Christianity from the year 0 up until the year 570 to understand Prophet Muhammad's encounters with Christians. So let me bring you into this historical perspective, and then we'll dive into Muhammad's relations with Christians. When Jesus leaves this earthly realm, and this happens with many religious leaders, people had different ideas of who Jesus was and what his ultimate mission was for humans. What did Jesus want for us? And also, what did Jesus believe? And quite early on in Christian history, again, we're talking after the year 33. That's when essentially Jesus moves on. There were debates within the small Christian community of who Jesus really was. Was he the literal Son of God? Was he divine? Was he partially divine? Was he merely a prophet? And then there are multiple other kind of narratives that flowed out. So we have two key figures that I want to focus on in this early part. One is Paul and the other is Peter. And actually, Peter and James need to be kind of connected as a single source. So Peter and James especially being the so-called brother or cousin of Jesus, James was the key figure of the Jerusalem church. And the Jerusalem church in the year 33 was believing in this idea that Jesus was a prophet and a Messiah, but they did not necessarily believe that Jesus was divine. And the Jerusalem church, led by James, and Peter was a part of this, they were ultimately concerned with getting ethnic Jews on board to Christianity, to convert only Jews to this idea that Jesus is a prophet and the Messiah. But Jesus, according to the Jerusalem church, was not the Son of God. Now, Paul comes in to the story, and many of you might be familiar with Paul of Tarsus, an ethnic Jew, had a long history of persecution of the Christian people. And Paul has a, let's call it a kind of transcendental spiritual moment where Jesus or God apparently comes to Paul and basically tells Paul that you are essentially the new caregiver of Christianity, that the proper Christianity goes to Paul. And Paul moves on. He moves around the region and essentially develops, as scholars rightly note, this idea of the Trinity, that Jesus is part of a God figure that incorporates God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. And this idea conflicts with the more monotheistic interpretation of Jesus's message that the Jerusalem church was giving. So from the very early moments of Christian history, once Jesus passes, you already have these different narratives developing. The Jerusalem church being more stringently monotheistic, and then Paul, who is developing the Trinity. Now, what happens? Where does Peter and his disciples go, and where does Paul and his people go? Paul moves west. Paul goes to Greece. Paul goes to the Gentiles. He goes into Europe and develops the Trinity. Peter and his followers largely move east. So the Jerusalem church, this stringent monotheism, is moving east. Let's move forward a generation later. You have Christian philosophers like Arius, which is where Arianism comes from. And Arius is very much aligned with this stringent monotheism linked to the Jerusalem church. And again, Paul's idea is moving westward. So the Jerusalem church Christians are moving east. So that's the 2nd century. Now let's go to the 4th century with Constantine. No relation, by the way. Everyone is like, are you Considine, Constantine? Is that the same thing? The Irish version of Constantine happens to be Considine. So there's a little irony there, I suppose. So think about how substantial this point is. Constantine in the year 313 is the emperor of Rome. Rome is losing its power. It's on the downward slope of its empire, and Constantine knew this. Constantine moves from England. He was based in England, comes to Rome, crosses the Milvian Bridge. The history books say that before this battle of the Milvian Bridge for control of Rome, Constantine saw a cross in the sky. And he went into this battle with this cross. He ends up winning the battle. And Constantine, if you can believe it, essentially converts the entirety of the Roman Empire from paganism to Christianity. And if you can think about how massive of a deal that is, especially for Rome, a massive global player, but think about any political leader or president of any nation converting to another faith and basically telling a nation that this is our new direction. So Constantine adopts Christianity. Knowing that Rome is falling, he moves the center of the Roman Empire to Constantinople, modern day Istanbul. Shortly after Constantine converts the Roman Empire to Christianity and moves the empire to Constantinople, he calls for the Council of Nicaea in 325. The Council of Nicaea in 325 is arguably one of the most important events in human history. It was there that Constantine essentially adopted or put forth as official policy the narrative of the Trinity, essentially aligning himself with the Paulian, the St. Paul version of Christianity, which is the Trinity, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. So that Jerusalem church that I was mentioning earlier, they essentially lost out at the Council of Nicaea. There was a debate. Constantine was saying, well, what is Christianity? If this is my empire's new faith, well, what is this faith? And they agreed right then and there. If you read the Nicene Creed, it's very clear that Christianity, the identity of it, is the Trinity. Now, that's a massive deal. All those who didn't abide by the Trinity, so the more stringent monotheists, those that didn't think that Jesus was part of a Trinity or the Son of God, were heretics. They were heretics. And what do leaders of nations or empires do to heretics? They push them out. They isolate them. They make them refugees. So those that lost the Council of Nicaea moved east, and they moved around the Arabian Peninsula and basically to the fringes of the Byzantine Empire. Right. So this is where we get to 570 now. Mecca in 570. The Arabian Peninsula in 570 was not a desolate, isolated region of the world that was disconnected or divorced from regional politics or international affairs. The Byzantine Empire, again, whose base is in Constantinople, controlled Syria, Jerusalem, the Levant, the Hijaz, and had essentially satellite nations in the southern Arabian Peninsula and also in Northeast Africa. Right. So when Muhammad was, 12, when he met Bahira the monk, which I'll talk about in a minute, Muhammad was traveling to Damascus, to Petra, to Jerusalem, to Gaza. And these were Byzantine-controlled cities. Now, that's to the northeast of the Arabian Peninsula. What is to the northwest, what is to the east? The Zoroastrian Empire, the Persian Empire, which was not Christian. And the Byzantines and the Zoroastrians were in what Juan Cole, a great historian from the University of Michigan, refers to as these two empires were locked in a Game of Thrones. If you're familiar with the great HBO series, The Game of Thrones, they were two empires grappling and struggling for power in the region. So this is the environment, the geopolitical environment that Muhammad was born into, but also as he moves forward in his life, this is what he experienced. So let's get to Muhammad's life. That's the Christian framework there. 582, as I mentioned, Muhammad is roughly 12 years old, runs into, as part of Abu Talib's trading caravan, Bahira the monk in Busra. And in the book, if you happen to get it, the first picture in the book, in the middle of the book, there's a collection of pictures. The first picture are the ruins of Busra, a Byzantine city. And it's a great story, according to Islamic sources. It says that Bahira was, this Christian monk who had all these ideas, but essentially predicted the prophethood, the coming prophethood of Muhammad, and saw in Muhammad something that was special, something that was different. And it all started because a cloud was hovering over Muhammad as he was protecting the trading caravan. And I write extensively in the notes section of this book, the symbolism of clouds. It sounds kind of silly. The symbolism of clouds in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is quite significant in terms of, God protecting people and God kind of unleashing these clouds to ensure that his chosen leaders are protected. So from very early in Muhammad's life, we have interactions with Christians. And this is what the book essentially is. It tells the story of Muhammad's life through the prism of his encounters, his documented encounters with Christians. But before I go forward, I just want to say quickly, we have ancient sources, Islamic sources mainly, but also Christian sources that explain Muhammad's interactions with Christians along this multicultural environment that he was traveling through in the trading caravans. But think about all the stories that weren't documented. All of the interactions that Muhammad had perhaps with Christian businessmen, merchants, and lay people in these cities like Busra, Damascus, Jerusalem, and so on. So from a very early age, he's recognized by Christians. But what kind of Christians? Who was Bahira? And in the book, I mentioned that, Bahira is very likely part of the Jerusalem church, not necessarily the Council of Nicaea Trinitarian church that the Byzantine Empire was advocating for. So that's 582. Let me move forward quite a bit here. And I'm fast forwarding through Muhammad's young adulthood in which he was traveling throughout this region. That's why I brought up this point, like, who was he interacting with in this period? I mean, this is a person who I refer to as a cross-cultural navigator. He was in all of these cities, trading, traveling as a merchant. And we know that he was a successful merchant. So how can you be a successful merchant if you're not willing and able to engage with others, to encounter others, to learn from others, to learn their ways, right? Let me fast forward to 610. This is obviously a very condensed version of the book here. 610. This is obviously a very significant moment for those who know Prophet Muhammad's life story. Muhammad, even before 610, was, as I refer to in the book, a mystic. This is a term that is often not associated with Muhammad, but he was a mystic. He was someone who appreciated, valued, and prioritized contemplation, even isolation, really thinking critically about even looking up to the sky and what is my purpose? What is happening? Who am I? Who are my people? What is happening around me? And of course, we know that the angel Gabriel visits Muhammad. And Karen Armstrong, a great biographer of Muhammad, refers to it as Muhammad's moment of terror. And it had to be a moment of terror. You had angel Gabriel, this kind of otherworldly force, coming to Muhammad, being in his presence, and basically saying that you are the person who's going to take the baton of monotheism and bring it to the people. And what does Muhammad do after meeting Gabriel? You can imagine he's leaving Mount Hira, he's leaving the mountain, probably petrified at what has been, what has happened. It's an otherworldly event. You're literally dealing with not a ghost, but it's an angel. It's an otherworldly thing. So he goes to his home in Mecca. He sees Khadija. He asks Khadija, what essentially, or shares with Khadija, this is what happened. What is this? And Khadija says, essentially, you've been chosen. This is your path. This all sounds okay. This is right. Khadija brings Muhammad to Warqa ibn Nawfal, who is Khadija's cousin. And I write in the book, and this is an important point, Muhammad and Khadija were married in 595. There's a very good chance that Warqa ibn Nawfal were probably at their wedding ceremony. So the year 610 was probably not the first time that Muhammad met Warqa ibn Nawfal. And I touch upon this in the book, not to say, because I know a lot of critics of Islam, if I could say that, like to say, well, Muhammad just stole the religion from Warqa, adopted this idea of Islam from Warqa, or Warqa taught Muhammad everything. That's not what I say in the book. What I do say, though, that the visitation of angel Gabriel in 610 confirmed for Muhammad everything that he had learned, everything that he had experienced through Warqa and through his travels. It all made sense to him. I think even before 610, he was thinking about the monotheistic tradition. He knew about Christians. He knew about Jews. He knew about Judaism. But it wasn't merely passed on through humans. What happened in 610 was divine. It was a divine revelation. Muhammad was chosen. I believe that, and I say this in the book. He was chosen to, again, be the person to carry the baton of monotheism forward. Now, 613. What happens 3 years after Muhammad receives these revelations? One, Muhammad goes public with the revelations, which is a huge issue, which I'll get to in a second. But also, you know what happened in 613? The Zoroastrian Empire conquered Jerusalem, a Christian city, a Byzantine city that Muhammad very likely visited. So he's receiving this monotheistic tradition, which is clearly linked to Christianity, and also learning that this non-monotheistic religion has gone into the heartland of the monotheistic tradition and conquered the people. And the Zoroastrians are even said to have removed the true cross, and even done things at the holy the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. right? So Muhammad is in between all of these dynamics. He goes public again in 613 with his message. And the persecution, of course, he's coming with this monotheism, and his the Hashim clan and the Quraysh tribe are essentially probably thinking, and I write this in the book, like, who is Muhammad now? What is he talking about? Is he a secret Christian? Is he a spy for the Jews? Who is this person? So he was automatically othered as a suspicious character, no doubt. That's 613. The persecution continues. 615. What does Muhammad do? He, again, was it divine that Muhammad was given this instruction to send the believers to Abyssinia for refuge? Or, as I write in the book, did Muhammad know that Abyssinia, did he know through his ancestral links, through his understanding of regional politics, did he know that there was a Christian king, Ibn Abjar, who was just, who was moral? And I say he knew that. So it's divine, yes, right? So everything Muhammad does is divine, but he was also like worldly. He knew that King Ibn Abjar was there. So he sends his people. It was really a miraculous journey. And I am very careful in the book to explain this, right? So you have a group of people, a very small group of people, who leave their home in Mecca, all of their comforts, their familiarities, and their friends and their family, and they travel across modern day Saudi Arabia. They get in a boat, they cross the Red Sea, and they end up in Aksum, which is the capital of the Abyssinian Empire. I mean, what a leap of faith that was in itself. And we know through historical sources, and I document this in detail, that the interaction between the Muslims and the Christians of Abyssinia was one. I mean, it's just so beautiful. I don't know how else to explain it. The term I use in the book is, it's a clear example of allyship. King Ibn Abjar not only allowed the Muslims to be present in his empire, but he actively defended them in front of their enemies. And that's honorable. It's a very honorable action for a leader to risk the safety of his or her own nation or empire to defend another group of people. And we also know that the Muslims and the Christians in King Ibn Abjar's court had a great dialogue, an interfaith dialogue that brings up verses of the Quran. So Jafar, who was the leader of the believers or the Muslims in Abyssinia, is reading verses from the Quran, and King Ibn Abjar is so moved by them. According to Islamic sources, they say that he was, crying until his beard was wet. And they talked about Mary. They talked about Jesus. And Ibn Abjar even said, not for a mountain of gold. He said this to the Quraysh, the enemies of Muslims, not for a mountain of gold would I give these people back to you. Right? This is 615, the most vulnerable time in the early Ummah. And who was there to protect them? Christians. It's a very, very, very powerful moment. Moving forward, 619, the year of sorrow. Muhammad's life is really crumbling. He loses Khadija and he loses Abu Talib. The persecution continues. What happens 2 years later in 621? The night journey to Jerusalem, the Miraj and the Isra. And I'm not going to dive too much into this, but there's a whole chapter on it in the book. And Muhammad is going through the stages of heaven, accompanied by who? Angel Gabriel. Again, one of the most fascinating parts of writing this book was how often Angel Gabriel came up in Muhammad's life. I was completely blown away by the frequency in which Gabriel is discussed in Islamic sources. And of course, Gabriel, for Christians who might be watching, you'd be quite familiar with Angel Gabriel. This is the angel that visited Mary and that basically started the Immaculate Conception of Jesus's miraculous birth. But the night journey to Jerusalem, Muhammad is meeting all of the Abrahamic prophets. He meets Jesus and John the Baptist. He meets Abraham. He meets Moses. And it's essentially a story of like one big family. And that's, I think, what the Islamic sources are essentially communicating, that Islam is a continuation of these things. And Muhammad is coming as a type of seal. So that's 621. Now we have obviously a very important period in 622 with the Constitution of Medina, which I write about in depth in this book. And I've also written about it in The Humanity of Muhammad, my previous book, A Christian View, The Humanity of Muhammad, A Christian View. But let me say this, being specific with Christians, there are scholars who basically claim that there were Christians in Medina when the Constitution of Medina was agreed upon. And the Constitution of Medina is essentially creating a civic nation, a multicultural nation. Muslims, pagans, Jews are all part of a confederation. Each group has freedom of religion, the right to own property, freedom of conscience, and they're all bound by political laws. But scholars, again, say that Christians were very likely in Medina, though they may not have been powerful enough, or they may not have had strong numbers enough to be part of the group that actually agreed to the Constitution. But there were very likely Christians in Medina. So the period from 622 to 630 is one of, as I refer to in the book, relative conflict, not only between the folks that had agreed to the Constitution of Medina, but we're also dealing with the Game of Thrones thing that Juan Cole talked about. So the Byzantine Empire fighting for their control, and the believers' army, Muhammad's army, is also caught up in struggles. And I'm very careful in the book to ensure readers that the conflict between all of these different religious communities is not rooted in theology. It's rooted in what all wars are really rooted in, which is power, resources, land, and ego, essentially. So two more things, quick. 630, we have the glorious event of the visitation of the Christians of Najran to Medina, to Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina. And another fascinating element of researching this book, when you look at who the Christians of Najran were prior to 630, so this is a community in southern Saudi Arabia, present day, southern Saudi Arabia, Yemen. If you go back 200 years into their history, they were facing severe persecution by a leader in particular named Du Nuwas. D-H-U, first name, last name, Nuwas, N-U-W-A-S. And this was said to be a Himyarite king, and the Himyarites were a Jewish tribe, a Jewish Arab tribe. And they were persecuting Christians. And the Quran mentions this actually about, Christians and Jews fighting not, in a nonsensical manner, and Christians being thrown into pits of fire, and all of these, crimes against humanity as we would consider them today. So when the Christians of Najran get the invitation to visit Medina in 630, you can imagine who is this person who's talking about, this idea of a bigger nation. of a confederation. So they go to Medina, they accept the invitation. And we know through the Islamic sources that not only did the Christians of Najran and the believers or the Muslims of Medina engage in a critical interfaith dialogue about Jesus, but we also know that Muhammad granted them the right to actually pray inside the masjid, inside the mosque, which even to this day, my friends, is really a remarkable, bold, brave, revolutionary idea that many Christians and Muslims would not be comfortable with. Allowing other people to walk into your sacred space and to be hospitable to them. And I'm very careful in the book, like what does this mean? You know, Muhammad allowing the Christians to pray in his mosque. What does that mean? Because many people were saying, well, you know, that is like antithetical. Is this story true? This can't be true. But what was Muhammad trying to communicate to his people? He was, as I write in the book, he was saying and communicating this idea. Hospitality is an act of faith. Being hospitable to people is an act of faith. It's the golden rule. Treat others how you want to be treated. Now, let me also say before we end here, the Christians of Najran were not, according to my research, and I outline this in the book, were not part of the Jerusalem church. They were not those very strict monotheists like Waraka was or like Bahira was. The Christians of Najran, according to my research, and also the Abyssinian kingdom, which we met in 615, these were satellites of the Byzantine Empire. So they were adherents to the Council of Nicaea, which is the Trinity. This is such an important point. Muhammad, and it's mentioned in the Quran, was critical of the Trinity. And that's a fair point. And I think that's a historical fact. But his criticism, if you want to call it that, or reservation to the Trinity, did not prevent him from engaging with people, from being hospitable with people, and being welcoming to people, right? So he had his beliefs, and these Christians were close in faith because they were Christian, even though they were Trinitarians. And Muhammad's revelations are saying, well, we need to be careful with the Trinity. He was still open to them. And I think this is important, and I'll end here, because even in my own research and my own writing and my own public advocacy of these things, I often hear verbally and through messages this idea that, well, Muhammad only liked certain Christians. He liked the real Christians, you know. He liked the Warakas. He liked the Jerusalem church Christians. He liked the Christians that didn't believe Jesus was the Son of God. But if you understand Abyssinia, and if you understand Najran, you would know that these Christian communities were not part of that Jerusalem church, that they were kind of the mainstream Christians, but it didn't. So he sent his people to the Trinitarians in 615, and then he welcomed the Trinitarians in 630. This is ultimately what the book is about. It's one of, again, building that bridge between Christians and Muslims, but it's also a deep dive into who these Christians were and how Muhammad not only engaged with them, but how he also dealt with theological issues. And I think he did a very admirable job of navigating this in a very skillful way, in a very diplomatic way, and in a very honorable way. And this is, of course, one of the many reasons why I have so much respect for him, because I think he was a bold leader. He was a rational person, but he was also someone greatly moved by the divine command of being compassionate and being loving of humans. So I'll end there, Emre.
Thank you, Craig, for that very concise aspects of the book. Of course, there's a great deal there. We'll tease out some of them, but I just want to a quick shout out, and I know we've got some friends tuning in from Australia. We've got from the comments I can tell, but I had a very interesting experience during my time in Melbourne, Australia, at the Australian Cultural Society. When I was based there, we organized a celebration of Prophet Muhammad's birthday, Mevlid Nabawi, at an Anglican church inside. It was very moving, very spiritual, and the pioneering bishop there, a very good friend. We weren't able to run that the first year because of issues from various other denominations, people from different Christian backgrounds that took offense to an Anglican church hosting. It wasn't even worship per se, it was a spiritual occasion, if you will, but it became difficult, if not dangerous. So what you're referring to in regards to something
it's real. Yeah, it's happening today.
Yeah, 1500 years ago, we're still, we have trailblazers, if you will, if you want to refer to Prophet Muhammad in that context of being a pioneer, and then modern day bishops and priests and others opening up their place of worship. But there are forces that come against that. So it's still difficult 1500 years on, or even 2000 years on after Jesus. So again, thank you. That was just something I remembered that you brought up. Of course, you speak about the, or you write about the Charter of Medina within the framework of a civic nation. Could you put that in context? What is a civic nation, and how does that charter uphold that concept? And then as a second part to it, from your readings and of course the other documents that you speak about, the Covenant of the Christians of Najran that you referred to, the Medina Charter itself, are there lessons for democratic nations, for civic nations today, particularly in light of what we've lived here in the United States? It's been a year since the January 6th incident on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And are there lessons for members of Congress? Are there lessons for past and present presidents in regards to such documents that Prophet Muhammad produced 1500 years ago or close to?
So the civic nation is one that needs to be distinguished from two other forms of nationhood. So let me define those other two first. The first is the ethnic nation, which is kind of very like primordial. It's very much like, you know, who are in the US context, it largely goes back to like the English Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Like these were the people who developed the early years of the country, and they were the people that largely contributed to like the revolution. So primordial, we're dealing with kind of homogeneity, oneness in terms of race. That's the ethnic nation. The racial nation is a more aggressive form of the ethnic nation. A racial nation, if you think of like the classic case of a racial nation, would be like Nazi Germany. Like, it's not only saying like this is who we are as a nation, but like we're also going to persecute other people, and we're actually going to aggressively pursue other people and kick them out. So the ethnic nation is conservative, basically saying this is who we are. The racial nation is like, this is who we are. So it's an extension of the ethnic nation, but they're aggressive in pushing people out. Now, the civic nation is completely different. The civic nation is one in which national belonging is not determined by ancestry, ethnicity, religion, race, phenotype, or even culture. A civic nation is one, excuse me, that is determined by law. And that's it. It's really determined by human rights. Human rights like freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, the right to own private property, the right to assembly, right? So there's nothing racial, religious, or cultural or ethnic in there. What makes you belong to a nation or a group of people, a confederation or a republic, are the laws. And this, ideally, I know most viewers are probably living in the United States at the moment. This is what represents the best of America. This kind of colorblind, if I could use that term, open, inclusive, democratic, universalist idea of what it belongs. Like, I'm Irish and Italian. Emre, you're Turkish. Many of our listeners are Turkish. Some of you are Muslim. Some of you might be Catholic or Protestant. It doesn't matter. Like, what makes us all American is literally the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, rights. And this is explicitly what Muhammad created in 622. And it's not only a remarkable feat to be carried out in the year 622, but it's also the Constitution of Medina. It's also a great bridge between not only Islam and Christianity, but between this idea of the West and Islam. Because the West is often associated with, pioneering this idea of a civic nation. Like, the Enlightenment somehow gave the world all of these human rights, like freedom of religion, freedom of speech. But like, if you look at the Constitution of Medina, and I include it as an appendix in the book, read the document, read the principles, read the articles. It's very, very clear what Muhammad was establishing for pagans, for Muslims, for Jews: freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, the right to own private property, the right to govern your own religious affairs. So the state, Muhammad's state, as head of state, he would not interfere in Jewish communal relations unless there was an issue that jeopardized the wellness of the whole community. Now, this is another important point of a civic nation. Think about it this way. The Constitution of Medina was an agreement amongst many tribes, as I've mentioned: Jewish, pagan, Muslim. Okay. The United States, we have our tribes, essentially. They're states: Massachusetts, New York, Texas, California. These are all republics. And states are allowed to essentially dictate their way of life. But at the end of the day, they're tied back to each other. They're mutually dependent upon one another through the Constitution. And that was Muhammad's genius. Again, divinely guided. God is telling Muhammad, like, this is the proper way to run a society. Give people freedom, but also make communities dependent upon one another. The second issue, Emre, that you brought up, the covenant with the Christians of Najran, another remarkable document that is an appendix of the book. This actually gets into even more detail than the Constitution of Medina does. The Constitution of Medina is very much like a political document, but the covenant is very social. The covenant that the believers in the early Ummah entered with the Christians of Najran says some of the following. If a church falls into disrepair within the realm of, Najran, it is an obligation of the Muslim community to help repair the church. So not seize the church, not take any of its goods, but to actually assist the Christians in rebuilding. And Muhammad, in the covenant with the Christians of Najran, even goes as far very early in the document, saying, like, I will protect you east and west, north and south. I will protect you by horse. I will protect you by man. I will protect you by sea. I am your leader. Isn't that what we do in this country? with the president? Isn't that what the presidency does? The executive branch, like it protects all of these little spots that we have in America, which are essentially states. So the Covenant with the Christians of Najran, read that in detail. It's a miraculous book, or a miraculous document. Now, January 6th. Okay, so this is an example of the combination of the ethnic and racial nation. This idea that America belongs to a certain group of people, and that people imagine America as somehow the property of, I think, what has emerged to be white, but also more specifically, probably like English ancestry, Irish ancestry, Scottish ancestry, German ancestry, and a few more other groups can get into that. But like that's the ethnic component, but the racial component is like the aggression and the violence and the willingness to create havoc. And it's very disturbing. It's antithetical to the Constitution of the United States. It's also antithetical to what Muhammad was outlining in the Constitution of Medina. So then we start wondering, okay, so if it's antithetical to the US Constitution and the Constitution of Medina, then what is it really antithetical to? Humanity. It is what happened on January 6th, and I don't want to get too political here, but it's an affront to a vision of this country and also a vision of our world that I think is divine. It's an affront to that vision of equality across the races, across the ethnicities, across the religions. God, if I can preach for a second here, God is our creator. Like the Quran says it quite well. We created you into nations and tribes so you can get to know one another. Paul's letter to the Corinthians said the same thing. We're not Jew or Gentile or Christian. Like we're humans. We're brothers and sisters. So ultimately, I think if I could add this point, there's a higher calling to nationalism. There's a higher calling. There's a bigger law above nationalism, and that's humanity. And we need to find a way of living in nations while not only recognizing diversity, but embracing that diversity and figuring out how to coexist with one another. And Muhammad did it perfectly. And I also think the founding fathers had a vision for it. And that is what we're still struggling to, strive to today.
Okay, thank you, Craig. I'm just going to put the book up here again. People of the book, there's a link, Amazon link, so please hit that for more details. The subtitle is Prophet Muhammad's Encounters with Christians. Of course, people of the book refers to Christians and Jews. Of course, you mentioned Jews, but it's not in the subtitle. It doesn't get as much coverage. Your area of expertise is Christian-Muslim relations, but any particular reason you excluded or didn't cover the relationship of Prophet Muhammad with the Jews? And we have a question from the audience that links to this, so I can ask this. It's an opportune time. This is from Mehmet Kılıç. Thank you for an amazing event with chronological events and the dialogue between the people of Christianity and Islam. Could you tell us where Judaism and Jewish people are in this equation as an Abrahamic and monotheistic religion?
So the question of like, why not Jews in this book? I mean, that is something that I grappled with when I was deep into writing the book, like when I get to the year 622, and then in subsequent years, when Muhammad has a falling out with Jewish communities, I realized that, maybe this book should have been bigger. But it was really just a logistical matter. I'm not going to lie, as an author. I mean, the book was written as like, we're going to provide a biography of Muhammad's life through Christians. So let me encourage other authors and other scholars out there to perhaps write another biography of his life through the prism of both, or just through the prism of Jews. So it was really just, it was not like I was not seeing the value of Muhammad's interactions with Jews. I mean, these are quintessential to his lived experience and to his mission. So it was really just more of a practical issue as an author. Now, in terms of where Judaism and the Abrahamic tradition kind of lie in this book, I mean, put it this way, like Judaism and the Jewish people are essentially like the eldest sibling in this whole family connection that I'm referring to. Islam doesn't come without Christianity. Christianity doesn't come without Judaism. And you have to understand the history behind it. It's a trajectory. It's as simple as that. When we talk about Judaism too, and we talk about all the prophets of the Old Testament, I mean, one of the things that I really love about the Islamic tradition and the Quran is that how it includes all of these Jewish prophets. Essentially, they were Jewish prophets, ethnically Jewish people. I mean, we're going from, Abraham to Solomon to David to Moses and so on and so forth. So Islam cannot be understood, and nor can Christianity. It cannot be understood without including the Jewish tradition. And let me also add, one of my favorite phrases of the Jewish tradition at large, and this will be familiar to those who are involved in interfaith dialogue, the phrase tikkun olam. So tikkun olam essentially means, to heal a fractured world. And this is originating in the Jewish tradition. When Jesus comes, I truly believe that Jesus was coming to bring the periphery members of society, the people who have been forgotten, and to bring them back into the fold of this kind of oneness of society, this wholeness, this family. We're all in this together. Let me bring these people back in. And what was Muhammad doing? He was doing the same thing, with different groups of people in a different time period. So Jesus and Muhammad are engaging in tikkun olam, but that's all coming from previous revelation. This is the interconnectedness of the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic tradition. And if I can end on a controversial point, maybe this is food for thought, but I wonder, and I say this because I've recently been criticized for advocating for an Abrahamic religion, which I personally haven't really thought critically about, and I haven't written about. But what if Jews, Christians, and Muslims started seeing each other not as members of different faiths, but members of the same faith, but of different sects? Just as Christians are evangelical, or even Methodist, Baptist, Episcopalian, Catholic. What if Jews, Christians, and Muslims started seeing each other this way? That we are part of the same tradition, but we just have different ways of looking at it. I don't know, maybe that's a bit progressive, if you want to say it, but religion evolves, and it's going to continue to evolve. And there's going to be thinkers who might be advocating for some of these things that I'm laying out that take it to the next level. And we already see it being done, Emre, like House of One in Berlin, the Abrahamic Family House in Abu Dhabi, the Tri-Faith Initiative in Omaha, and even the Museum of Tolerance in Jerusalem. Like, we are seeing like Jews, Christians, and Muslims coming together, not in this kind of interfaith dialogue circle saying, hey, we have a lot of similarities. We have people like living together now, working together. I think this bodes well for our future if we continue on this path.
And by all means, those watching live or watching this later, add your comments, as they say. Let's see if people want to debate this, but we'll leave that, of course, That's an extended talk elsewhere for another occasion. Now we've got some other questions. I think we've got another 5 or 10 minutes. I think we'll go a little bit over time if that's okay with you, just to get some questions in. Emre asks, some Orientalists claim that Mecca was a Christian colony and the origin of the Quran is Syro-Aramaic. Do you have anything to say about this claim?
I mean, there's not a lot of evidence for it. I'm big into primary documents and primary knowledge, if I could say that. I think a lot of this argument is speculation. Do I think it's unrealistic? Not necessarily either. So I'm kind of in, but I don't really, I can't convincingly say that it is or it isn't. But there's no primary material saying that it was. And like, why didn't Christian historians write about Mecca? Like that probably would have been documented by the Byzantine Empire. Abyssinia was, Najran was. These things were in the realm of knowledge of the Byzantine Empire, but Mecca wasn't. However, like, was there a Christian presence in Mecca? Even before the time of Prophet Muhammad? I would say very likely. But again, we need to be careful. And I respect this this reservation coming from the Orientalists, because a lot of Orientalists are saying that, Islam is just like a continuity of Christianity and it's not divine. I reject that. I reject that forthright. Islam is part of the same tradition, but it's also coming at a distinct point in time through a distinct person. And it was revealed and it was pushed out and documented in the Quran. So I think I'm somewhere in the middle there. Waraka ibn Nawfal, some folks say that Waraka ibn Nawfal was the bishop of Christianity in Mecca. I mean, but that's a story. How can we prove that? So until I see the proof, I can't believe in this kind of mainstream Orientalist narrative.
There's the term of Hanif, Abrahamic community that were monotheistic, which you may have come across. And that's, again,
I do. I read about that. Yeah.
A separate discussion. So our viewers can look into that, Hanif. We've got another question, actually 2 from the same person. What have you learned about Islam that you didn't know before writing this book that you can share with us? And how has this book affected your own faith?
I would say, number one, just write this down. Number one was that Islam did not emerge outside of global affairs. I think I was kind of thinking before this that, Mecca, Saudi Arabia was this kind of, this like backwoods, like land that like had no civilization, that had no encounters, and like no one from Mecca or anywhere in Medina or elsewhere were traveling anywhere. And that's just not, I don't think that's historically accurate. Mecca was part of a transnational community, like it was connected to the world. And even researching the history of the Kaaba itself is quite interesting. Being Muhammad being the ancestor of the Hashim clan. The Hashim clan were the guardians of the Kaaba. And I didn't mention this earlier, but like when Muhammad returns to Mecca towards the end of his life, some hadith mentioned that he safeguarded and protected a icon or a mosaic or whatever it might, a fresco of Jesus and Mary. How long was that there for? Was that there when his father and grandfather were there? Right. So like Mecca was like, it was a hub. It was a hub of religion. So, and Muhammad grew up in that. And like that's what fascinated me. Like Juan Cole's book, Muhammad, the Prophet of Peace, in the Age of Empire, something like that. That's not verbatim, but like Juan Cole really situates like the region. And you have to understand what was going on around Muhammad at the time to really understand why he was successful in his mission. The second thing that surprised me, and I mentioned this earlier, was Angel Gabriel. I mean, that was just fascinating. 610, it happened. 622, 621, it happened with the night journey. It also happened at the Battle of Badr. Islamic sources say that Gabriel came and protected Muhammad and his troops. There have been scholars of the Islamic tradition that have concluded that Angel Gabriel visited Muhammad like 24,000 times, which is a lot more than he visited Jesus and Moses. How it impacted my own faith, that's a great question. When I started this talk, where did I start? You know, I started basically in the year 0 and then 33. And then I went from 33 up to the second century with Arius. And then I moved to 325 with the Council of Nicaea. Now, for me, you can't understand the Islamic tradition without going back and understanding the evolution of Christianity and the doctrine that has become Christianity, which is largely the Trinity. So for me, writing this book was perhaps most beneficial in understanding Christian history for me. You know, understanding that this idea of the Trinity, which I was born and raised with and ingrained with and arguably indoctrinated with, like it wasn't always the consensus. Think about that. You know, it wasn't always the consensus. It took the emperor of Rome to say, this is what we are. And with the Trinity, do I believe it should be the official doctrine of faith? I do not. Do I believe in the Trinity? I do. But I don't think it should be a requisite of faith. And I think the Council of Nicaea did some things that I can't jump on with regarding people as heretics. I think this is very, very dangerous. And we see it today, not only in the Christian tradition, but across the world, of people feeling and thinking that they have a monopoly over their faith. And they start pointing fingers at other groups that are within their religion and saying, you're wrong, you're a heretic. And because you're a heretic, you're going to be pushed out of your land. You're going to be exiled and you're going to be othered. I don't agree with that. That's not part of the divine plan. It's not part of the divine mission, which is, human rights, really, this fundamental idea of being able to, have your own conscience and being able to stand and be respected for what you believe in. I truly believe in that. As long as you're not, doing harm to people. Like, I'm not talking about like respecting the KKK. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. But if you consider Christianity to be purely monotheistic, what harm is that doing? I don't think that's doing harm to people, but, that has not always been the consensus throughout history. People think that, there's a divine plan. And if you think that you're a Christian and you're a monotheist, you're going to hell. I just don't believe in that. God is merciful. God is compassionate. I just don't see it.
Thank you, Craig. We don't have any time for other questions, but I've got one comment from Leslie, who says, aiming to the concept of one faith under the monotheistic ideology. This is something we should strive for. Thank you, Dr. Considine.
Thank you.
Let me thank everyone. Thank you, Craig, for joining us again. You've already seen the book. Here it is again. You've got a link to it in the description. So please visit the description. Of course, like this video, Subscribe to our channel. It helps popularize the work we do around social cohesion, community building, and of course, understanding the other. And there's various links. Subscribe to obviously our social media networks and newsletter, which you'll also find in the description. So until next time, thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.